I think, well, first I'd like to say thank you to Tracy and Kent for their hard work. They are actually currently students, and they are also currently practicum students, one in Kansas City, Missouri at Reggio Emilia Early Childhood School, and the other in Wichita, Kansas in the public schools summer enrichment program. So they're up a little bit late tonight, but I know that they have serendipity in their stories of how they arrived in Gifted. You know, Vlad, when we first started talking about this recently, there was one model that came to mind, just one in the field of gifted education, and that's Tannenbaum's C-STAR model. And, you know, it's always fun to try to share screen, isn't it? But I'm going to give it a try here. So hopefully I can make that larger. There we go. Okay, I really like this particular model of giftedness. Tannenbaum developed it in 1983. In 1983, if you think back just a little bit, that was on, it may not sound that close to Sputnik, but Sputnik was a huge event in the United States in terms of giftedness, because all of a sudden we were no longer I'm sorry to say, okay, I know this is an international presentation, but we were no longer #1, and that was a huge issue for Americans. And so we thought we had to get with the program and start training, and especially in science and math. You know, Barbara Kerr, for instance, went to one of the first STEM kind of schools in St. Louis. And she's very active in the field of giftedness and creativity. She's at the University of Kansas. And so, you know, we started to, you know, kind of wake up, you might say. And at that point, we pretty much thought of giftedness as a quality that related primarily to IQ. Well, you know, that didn't last that long, because before long, we found out that people cannot be defined by IQ alone, kind of like man cannot live, man or woman cannot live by bread alone. You know, you need more than that. And so Tannenbaum from Columbia University came up, well, I should back up maybe a little bit here. In about 1971, following the whole Sputnik thing, Marlin wrote a report and actually defined what giftedness was. Well, giftedness was difficult to define, just like IQ is difficult, intelligence is difficult, creativity. Look at where we're going tonight, well, I should say today, wherever we all are, with creativity. You know, we're talking about serendipity. You know, so there's new avenues and there's possibilities. I see is now a new line of research. Congratulations, that's very exciting. So starting with the Marlin report, there wasn't just IQ or specific ability. There was also maybe visual or performing arts at that point. There was athletic ability and creativity. So, you know, creativity was in the mix, but in the United States, the states have a federal voice, but the states also have a voice. So every state can kind of decide what they think giftedness is. And a lot of states only maybe choose IQ even now, but many states choose creativity. So when we talk about giftedness, for instance, the program at Emporia State, where I direct the program, is technically called Gifted, Talented, and Creative. So we have kind of a holy trinity there of all three things. And if you think about areas like performing arts, visual arts, those are talents. If you think about IQ, well, maybe that's academic ability. And then we had our last speaker, Bem, talk about creative intelligence. We might say creative giftedness as well. So what does that all mean? Well, as the C-STAR model of identifying kids because Tannenbaum was in the Teachers College at Columbia University. He had 5 points, 5 main points, which would be general ability, which might refer to IQ, specific of aptitudes, perhaps that's talents, non-intellective. So now what's happening with this? If IQ is, if we go back to people like Binet or, the longitudinal studies in California, if we think about those are primarily on IQ, okay? But now we've got non-intellective requisites as well. One of the most important would be motivation. And of course, motivation can certainly impact creativity as well. So going beyond, Tannenbaum took it a little further, beyond the non-intellective, and of course, many other like self-efficacy, many things in that area there, but also environmental supports. Now you notice that we're inching over to the last one, because in environmental supports, that's something else that we may or may not have control over in schools, which is kind of the setting for our talk here. That's what we try to do. We try to modify the environment for children who have been identified with potential for giftedness in some areas. Well, okay, so Tannenbaum is the only one I really know of that puts chance in there. So I think chance is a bit of a double-edged sword, serendipity, that's a nice term, Vlad. Serendipity tells us that everything's going to go well, but things don't always go well. And, and I think that's the thing about serendipity. Serendipity can take things that aren't so good and turn them into good things. So like, here's a couple of examples. If you think of inventions as a form of creativity, okay, right? So how was champagne invented?
I feel like I should know that. I know it's a protected brand.
Okay, we'll make it a rhetorical.
By my French wife.
Okay, well, probably somebody out there realizes that it was by accident, So can we say that that was serendipity? I mean, I guess if you like champagne, it would be, And, some people really like Coca-Cola. And did you know that Coca-Cola was also invented somewhat through chance? Well, if you call prohibition chance, okay? So Coca-Cola was originally actually invented as kind of a form of French wine, as an alcoholic beverage with medicinal properties. So when prohibition hit, guess what? That could have been really bad news, right? For this French wine, medicinal French wine. However, an enterprising person put some fizzy water into it and made it non-alcoholic, and voila, there you are, Vlad, Coca-Cola.
The champagne of soft drinks.
There you go. We do that, right? So inventions. So I know, you could go on and on and on, Post-it notes and so many things that, oh, wow, look at that. We have something that we didn't know how to live without before that came along. So, you asked maybe about our story, and I'll conclude maybe my part. I know that we're giving maybe some introductory remarks here, and I want to make sure that Kent and Tracy both have lots of time to share some of those examples, because they're here to keep me honest. They are there with their boots on the ground with those kids in the classroom. Actually, I observed Tracy today in her classroom with first grade, or maybe they weren't first graders, but they were pretty young and very lively. So I will tell you just a little story, just like Alistair told earlier when he was at the chocolate machine. And then he showed a picture of a very special person in his life. At least I think I got that right. I hope I did, Alistair. It's such a lovely story. A while back, like I'll just say 1983. Okay, so that might date me just a little bit. I needed to take an elective course at the end of a master's degree, and I thought, what should I take? Sometimes when you're in a situation like that, you think, hey, it doesn't really matter. I'm almost done. I just need to take this course. And there was this course that really intrigued me. And we're talking about 1983. That's the same year Tannenbaum developed this C-star model. It's about the same time Joe Renzulli started writing, publishing in gifted journals about gifted education. Well, I took a class in secondary gifted methods with Dr. Joyce Miller at what is now Texas A&M and Commerce. And as I listened to her teach, I thought, wow, that sure does make sense. And I thought, that's really cool. And off I went. I graduated. I went on my happy little way. Well, at another point in my life, and this is where we talk about chance, and I'm really landing heavily on that arm of the sea fish, starfish. My husband became ill, and we needed to. He needed to go on a leave of absence because he was chronically ill, which meant that I, who had been a pastor's wife at that point with a young daughter we'd gone through about 5 or 6 years of him being very ill. And so we moved to Wichita, and I knew that I would have to work. I already had a doctorate by that point. And so, I wasn't really keen on going back into the elementary classroom at that point, but I wasn't really sure what the future was going to hold. And Bam, I loved it that you talked about you got to be doing something. You can't just be sitting at home twiddling your thumbs. Someone has once said you can't steer a parked car. So you got to do something. And that's when the magic, I think, because I think of serendipity is very magical. That's when some of that magic starts to happen. Because we did move to Wichita, and I thought, wow, what am I going to do? I'm not sure I'm really ready for higher ed. I've been at home with my daughter. Now I have to go back to work. What am I going to do? Well, of course, you see it coming, right? So I thought, wow, they need a gifted facilitator there, and I thought, I wonder what that means. I wonder what it's like to be a gifted facilitator. What's that mean? What are gifted kids like? What is that anyway? And so, and the same day that my daughter was asked, they asked her to be tested for gifted in her elementary school. I was applying for a gifted job. So, okay, so let's just fast forward just a little bit here since I don't have unlimited time. And let's say that in 2006, I have now been working at the university directing the gifted program after having taught gifted in Wichita for 5 years. And I go to a conference in Austin, Texas, with someone working on her master's. We're going to do a presentation down there. So we're in the convention center. Okay, now Austin's a capital of Texas. Texas is a big state. This is a big civic center. I walk in, we go to find our room, which is a little tiny room somewhere far away. And we walk in, and who is in that room? Okay, now how many rooms are in this building? What's the odds? I'm not talking math here. I'm just talking serendipity. Joyce Miller was in that room. And she was my inspiration, you might say, along with Joe Renzulli, because it just made so much sense pedagogically to me. And she stayed for our presentation, and I thought, oh, great, it's wonderful to see you. So, so again, we can fast forward a little bit to 2013, and who is co-elected to the World Council for Gifted, Joyce Miller and Connie Phelps and some others. So once again, our paths cross, and I just have to say we're currently collaborating in a number of research projects together. And so what a joy. Could I have planned that? But did I drive to Austin, Texas? Yes, I drove. Did I sign up for an elective class? Yes, I signed up, And I also, I think, Beth, I don't know if you mentioned this or not, I think you did. The part about things that actually appeal to you. You don't want serendipity necessarily in things that don't appeal to you. And it's not part of that pursuit. So I'm thanking Tannenbaum for his brilliance in the field and realizing that there's a broadening. It's the people who make contributions in the world are not necessarily those with the highest IQ. Yes, they may have really high IQs, but creativity goes a long way to really make those contributions count in society. And so does chance. So, and I don't know if we call it by chance that I have these two wonderful students with me tonight or today who just finished a class in creative teaching and learning that I taught this past spring. And I chose both of them. I asked both of them because Kent, for instance, expressed real interest in the creative problem solving model that it finally made sense, to him. And he was excited about that. And I looked at Tracy's journaling because we used class notebook out of Microsoft, and which meant she could draw, which made things a lot more interesting than if it was just some kind of paper, So with that, Vlad, I'm gonna kind of toss the ball back to you with that introduction of saying, thank goodness for serendipity.
Indeed, and I don't think we have them here by chance, but by luck, if I may. And apologies, I basically graduated you both, but I'm just anticipating here, I'm supposing. So Tracy, do you want to have some opening kind of remarks relating to the topic?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I am so thrilled and, honored to be here among all these amazing brains. So my name is Tracy Russman, and I'm a gifted facilitator at Olathe West High School in Olathe, Kansas. And I really feel like I am here today as a direct result of giftedness, creativity, and most definitely serendipity. Because the whole first part of my educational and professional career was a strange and wonderful journey. I really intended to be a theater major at a small Midwestern college, and I got a phone call one day, or my mom did actually. I walked in the house and my mom said, "Do you know where you're going tomorrow morning?" And, as an 18-year-old, I was like, oh my God, what did I do now? And it turned out I had an interview at the Kansas City Star, which is our daily newspaper. And I won a full ride scholarship to KU for journalism. So I love to write, and who doesn't want to get to go to school for free? So boom, I was a journalism major, and I loved every minute of it. I loved being at KU. I felt like it was my perfect place to be. And then, switching to my professional career, I spent a number of years working in journalism as a newspaper editor, working in marketing, political and social justice oriented positions, because for 20 years, I lived in a small town in South Dakota, and I was fortunate enough to get to work on several grant funded projects involving service learning. And it was just a tremendous experience for me that was really filled with those happy accidents of employment and interaction with amazing students and amazing people. So I came to education 7 years ago, and I'm going to go back to Connie, to Dr. Phelps' comment that sometimes really amazing things can come from things that aren't so good. So I lost my husband, my children lost their father. And as a result, my family relocated back to Kansas. And I took a job in a high school as a paraeducator just because I wanted to have the same schedule as my kids. And really what I intended or thought was going to be a blip on my professional radar turned into like a passion project that is going to last me for the rest of my life. And not so much for me, but for the students that I get to interact with, every day, like 2 master's degrees later, and now this wonderful work that I'm doing, in giftedness with Dr. Phelps. I actually started, I worked for 3 years as a resource teacher in special education proper. And then last spring, I was sitting writing IEPs and I got a text from a coworker at a different school saying, "Hey, teaching gifted?" with like 4 question marks. And I replied back, "Well, that sounds great, but I don't know if I'm certified or not." So I ended up going in for what I thought was a casual conversation and walking out with a job. And 2 weeks later, I took my praxis exam. And 3 months later, I talked to Dr. Phelps on the phone because I found out that I actually needed a program to teach gifted. So anyway, that really brings me to the students that I'm working with. Like any new teacher, I walk into this classroom, I'm so excited to meet all these amazing kids, and I have all these fabulous ideas to discuss with them. And then of course, we start a new job in the middle of a lockdown and COVID-19. So you have that element. And then once we finally did start getting some students into the class or into the school building, I figured out really quickly that students, my gifted students, like avoided my room like the plague. It would be like, I'd be like, "Hey," and they were like gone, and it took a lot of conversations and reaching out to people and relationship building to figure out really what the problem was. They started opening up to me. They're like, "Ms. Russman, we're just burnt out. We did so many projects and so much work in middle school, and elementary was kind of fun, but it was a lot of work. But middle school is like, man, we're tired. Plus we're taking all these really hard classes, and we're not sure we need it anymore." So my response back, because I always have one, is, "How about you just come hang out with me?" Okay. Because what you need is to decompress a little bit. And maybe some days you might need to work. Maybe some days you need to chill. Maybe some days you need to meditate. Maybe you and I can talk about some of your passion projects. I've got a student that writes music every day, and it's amazing. I have another student that loves statistics, but he also loves sports. He loves math. And so he and his buddies created a podcast. These are the sorts of things that I feel like we could be doing at the high school level. And I don't want to take up too much time here, but I'm just going to plant the seed that thanks to Dr. Phelps and the professional problem solving project that she referenced, I went to my district administration and said, "Okay, so I have this great idea. What if we did this? What if we did a social marketing project, with our gifted students district-wide, and really got our students involved in that process?" There's this great book that I would be glad to share with everyone. And it's really a step-by-step introduction for students into what is marketing, how do we do focus groups? How do we do an assessment? And then, like, in my opinion, and then I'll hush up and let Kent speak, but giftedness, like everything else, changes over the years. And without an identity, elementary age students, primary age students deserve to get to determine, like, what does it mean to be gifted for us? And middle school deserves the opportunity to have that same sort of conversation amongst themselves. And high school students do too. And so also, I would love to see a mentorship program from elementary to middle to high, so that students know what to expect, so that they don't think automatically that the next level is going to be a repeat of the level before, if that makes any sense at all. So ideally, what I just really feel like education is most successful when you have first, you're marrying every aspect of life. When what we learn in the classroom is real and we know it can be applied in the real world. And those serendipitous experiences, they happen one-on-one. When we're developing relationships with students and we get to know those students for who they are, like I consider as a gifted facilitator, I'm a conduit for the student. I talk to them and find out who they are, what are they interested, what do they like to do? And that is where the magic happens, in the conversations and in helping, spark a fire in whether it's intellectually or creatively or a combination of the two. But that starts with the individual, and that is a gift that we have, or that I'm saying that I have with my small gifted classrooms. Would I like to see them grow bigger? Yes. Is there a pathway to that? Yes. But I really value, and I love the topic of this conference. I love, hearing Bem and Alistair and all the other people that are bringing such amazing ideas to light. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And we love having you here. And I can't wait to kind of talk further about your practical experiences. It sounds fantastic. And I appreciate all of you sharing personal and professional moments of serendipity. Excellent. So Kent, do you want to tell us as well some opening remarks?
Sure. Am I audible? Am I good?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my name is Kent Hicks, and it's an honor to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I work with much younger kids. I'm a primary school teacher, so anywhere from maybe 5 years old to 11 years old. So I would like to give you an idea of what my job is like. I think it's my last job. I think I'm doing this forever. I really, really enjoy it. So I've got something written here, kind of a prepared statement. So forgive me if it's a little stiff, but it'll help keep me on track here as I go through some props and some different ideas. All right. So a little about my background. I taught regular education Spanish as a foreign language for 14 years in both rural and urban schools. I believe and always believe that education with lasting value is created when students take ownership of their own success. I believe that metacognition is important. Therefore, I spent my years as a Spanish language teacher trying to assess the level of each student and present appropriate challenges. I wanted to teach students how to learn, not just facts. My teaching style usually fell flat, however, because students would only occasionally study if told exactly what to study and how to study it, and would almost never study if I asked them to identify their own learning needs and develop a plan for success. I changed my job to primary level gifted. In the 2 years that I've taught gifted at a primary school, I've usually had success in my lessons that require students to sketch ideas for success instead of paint by numbers. I teach accelerated math. I invite students to create tools and test the math we do. And remember, these are little kids. We studied multiplication of fractions and slopes of lines this year. We drew colored lines on graph paper to represent different slopes. We made models with blocks and rolled paper tubes as viewfinders to apply slope to measure high objects we couldn't reach, such as flagpoles and football stadium lights. Here's a model that one of my students made. I just didn't take it apart at the end of the year, but you look through here and you look up at the flagpole. If you can, it's a tube like this, and you can measure something high that you can't touch, which was exciting for the kids. Here's a model that has a 1-to-1, a 1/1 slope. Other students made very steep slopes, 3/1 or 2/1, and we got to multiply with lots of fractions. We determined that our football stadium lights are 27 meters high. These are kind of like survey equipment made at the Lego level of precision and expense. The students worked with pride and parents gave positive feedback. Serendipity is a rare thing that we can't force to happen, but we must be ready just in case. This year's classes were in person. Last year, we had to suddenly isolate at home in March. All learning was remote. This allowed me to start a YouTube channel named Rex Nelson after the two primary schools I work in. I would do projects such as replace the old rotting escape hatch over my basement window. So something like this. It turned into like Mr. Hicks's woodshop adventure sort of thing. I don't know if you've seen the American show Tool Time, but it turned into home improvement like projects. So I would ask the students, let's see, where was I? I would ask them to calculate how much the materials would cost if I would go to the lumber yard and I want to buy X, and the lumber yard wants X dollars to cut Y number of boards that cost Z dollars each with a 10% educator discount they gave me. And before adding sales tax, I think that's what some of you call value added tax. Students, parents emailed me the correct answer of how much I spent to make my escape hatches to my house. And they were correct. It was about $37.59. And the kids got it. And they're like, 8. So I was very happy about that. And then we just went on to the next project after that in a video series. And so in that case, I really wanted to be with the kids, but COVID did present an opportunity in a way. It made me stretch. I enjoyed the moment of making the best of it with my students. But I would like more. What I would like more is to watch a student react to a crisis and direct their own learning solutions. And maybe that will happen one day. And I won't be guiding the serendipity as much as watching the students experience it for themselves. So that's a little window into what I do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I love that you have the physicality of what you do as well, and you brought it to us. I think that we're missing a little bit that element, in the online environment somehow. Excellent. So I think we have until 30 past, so we have at least some good 20 minutes of conversation, and there is so much that we can talk about, and you shared so much, and thank you very much for that. I think I want to go back a little bit to the starfish model. Was it, Connie? And I'm intrigued, by the model and the fact that, of course, chance is there included. And talk a little bit with you about what would be your preferred models when you engage in practice with issues around creativity, serendipity. So this is one model. I heard also about creative problem solving being mentioned. What would be the tools that you bring to the classroom, basically? Whoever wants to take this question, absolutely. This is for all of you.
Well, there's two classic tools, and these two can give you good examples of those. The two of the classic, these are more pedagogical strategies than models, Vlad, although we like to make sure that we have theory and evidence-based practices behind us, which is really a lot of what started early on with the research in gifted ed. We don't have funding. People don't feel sorry for gifted people. So funding can be very difficult to get, but we have one source of federal funding, which is the Javits funding, which fuels places like the University of Connecticut and University of Virginia and some other areas way back, to the 1970s. So we're a relatively new field. There are many theories, and I'm happy to say that creativity is alive and well. I just conducted some research on creativity articles in gifted journals and found that the trend is up. The trend has been increasing. Just as an intelligence broadened, so has creativity broadened. So we do have some evidence-based practices such as acceleration, which the University of Iowa has, along with Nick Colangelo and some of his colleagues, have books full of research to support acceleration. So that is where we quicken the pace when students need a faster pace. And the other classic would be enrichment. So enrichment is what Tracy was referring to earlier with passion projects and, but with a real world experience. And I actually saw Kent. Kent was doing those window covers. He lived in Wichita. I mean, if you know anything about Kansas, like think Wizard of Oz, think tornadoes, I used to live in Wichita. My house had those too, So very important kind of feature of a home. And he was using that as a real world kind of example with his kids during lockdown in his own home. So those are some teaching strategies, but I know that there are many models out there. I think in the end, we need a blend of certain things. We need to realize that giftedness, you can't just dissect a person's giftedness or creativity or talent. It's a blend, and it involves the affective domain. It involves the cognitive domain, and now we're throwing in serendipity, and I'm just so glad. I think there has to be a better way than just chance. But I'll let, and we have another person. I see another person from Kansas here tonight, Lee Johnson, who is on our state board for our state organization and actually coordinating the state conference that you'll be speaking at later this year. Glad.
Well, I'm also adding giftedness to my words.
So more serendipity in the works here. So if Lee decides to jump in, we're happy to hear from her as well. But I'll defer to Tracy and Kent.
Actually, one interesting angle that you brought up, Connie, and I appreciate that, is this idea of tailoring different tools to your own needs and maybe to your own style as well. So I'd be curious, yes, if Tracy or Kent have any other ideas of tools that they used and maybe used in a particular way in their practice.
Well, I'm going with what is hot on the stove for me right now, which is the practicum where I am working this week. It's called the Bambini Creativi School, and right now it has students from pre-K up to about 6th grade, and it's founded on the Reggio Emilia approach. And, I don't know how familiar everyone is with that, but it's the idea based on the image of the child with the potential for development and rights, the rights of the child and the 100 languages in which a child learns, which could be touch and feel and musicality and movement and there is so much voice and choice and action and accountability, and I feel like I fell in love yesterday, and yet I don't necessarily feel qualified really to speak to the depth and the breadth of the approach, because I need to know so much more. But I feel that there needs to be a way to take this approach into our classrooms. And we all have structure that we need to work within, but the idea that, the teacher does all the same prep that they would do. And maybe you like in a baseball game, you toss the ball and you see where the students take it. And then you choose your path for the day, depending on what the student's choice is in terms of your learning targets and learning goals. Does that make sense? And so that's something that is a tool that I want to learn more about and employ on the daily, in my professional life.
Excellent, thank you. And Ken, do you want to add anything before we open up to the audience? I can see some questions are accumulating already on the chat.
Sure. I was sort of struck by when we talk about tools used, tools available to teacher. I don't know if there were reflections of our own goals, our own personalities. So not to go off on a personal tangent, but I guess that the joy for me in learning is when you know that you've got a skill, you've got a fact, you've got an understanding. It's almost something that you can have that no one can take away, like a physical object. You are 8 years old and you can measure the tops of trees and you have figured out how to do this. I tend not to do as many collaborative social activities as much as just those activities where you feel like you've got something that you didn't have before. So my tools are actually tools, calipers, yardsticks, a lot of calipers. Kids love calipers. If I can measure a hair or something and they want to bring their dog's hair to know if is Mr. Hicks's hair thicker or less thick than a golden retriever's. Turns out it's thinner, but the tools are my tools. Actually, the big box of tools. Yeah.
Excellent. I love this idea of, yes, indeed, the tools itself, themselves, they become the tools we're looking for in so many ways. So I think Bem had a very interesting question in the chat, and her question is there a giftedness in the ability to push the potential of chance? So that's a wonderful way of thinking, I guess, about giftedness, as we discussed, and I appreciated also the comment on there is no such thing as giftedness that is kind of given already and solidified and out there, for us to discover, but it's something that we kind of work with and co-construct in so many ways. So how would you define giftedness if you were to look at it through the lenses of making the most out of chance or developing a serendipitous mindset? Could we think or rethink the way we think of giftedness in a way? Is there a special talent, do you think, that people might have to be able to use chance systematically?
I definitely think so. I think it's called creative problem solving. And there is kind of a nexus, I think, Bem, that's an intriguing question you're posing, of intelligence. So being able to perceive, maybe having the intellect and maybe the abstract thinking ability. And on the creativity side, if we want to balance it out, kind of balance that intellect and creativity, because creativity can be enhanced. Intelligence can be channeled, maybe, might be one way, but I'm going to say that we can develop creativity further maybe than we can our own innateness. I don't want to get into a big discussion on that, but in general, people aren't going to change 20, 30 measures of intelligence, whereas you could significantly, I think, increase your creative thinking processes. But if you go back to a process of problem solving, I think that then, like, I need this, or maybe there would be some, Bem, does that make sense to you? If you're trying to solve some problems and the viability of increasing chance. Now, gambling, obviously, being a statistician or gambling or something, that would be one way of thinking about it. But I think maybe, hopefully it is on a moral side of things and not so self-serving.
May I jump in with potentially
Please.
what might be a nice idea to frame some of this? So Samantha Copeland has a theory that she's developing of of meti. So in terms of sort of Greek understanding of knowledge, and we have techne and episteme. And she's using Meti, who's a Greek goddess, who she was actually the mother of Athena. And when Zeus went to kill her, she shrunk herself really, really small, and he swallowed her, and she stayed alive. And she then, that's why Athena comes out of Zeus's head. She creates the armor for Athena. She does everything, and then Athena is born from Zeus's head. And Meti embodies a certain sort of interaction with the world, with chance, so responding responsively to environmental uncertainties, the things that come about, which is associated with cunning. And there's a lot of value loading on cunning, but this isn't supposed to be value loaded, I think we think of cunning as being a negative thing. It's often associated with negativity, but actually from Copeland's work, this cunning is really about being able to engage with the world, and it's a sort of knowledge that we don't necessarily privilege or understand in our current education system, really, almost like street smarts or something like that. And I think there is definitely a form of intelligence that involves that, which then means that because you're engaging with this environmental uncertainty in a very skilled way, you will increase, if serendipity happens, you'll at least increase your chance of building on it and using it. So this thought of Meti, and she's definitely writing more about it, I think is very interesting in terms of our framework of thinking about these things. And also Meti's quite cool, right? Because Zeus tried to kill her, and instead she just gave birth to Athena in him. So that makes her quite cool.
Wasn't it also the not the funny, but the the remark that when wisdom is born, because Athena, right, is wisdom, it's kind of giving you a headache, because she was like kind of giving a head-splitting headache to Zeus. That's what I remember of the story. But thank you, Wendy, for reminding us.
Yeah, and Wendy, that is interesting. I mean, it's like we're headed somewhere here in this conversation with wisdom. Sternberg has added wisdom. Other people have added a form of spirituality to their theories, and so on. So that again, non-intellective kind of a quality is quite important. And I see Lee has limited internet, so she won't be able to jump in to speak, but she's shared some interesting things there about chance. And what we do in the schools with gifted kids is to enhance their opportunities. And very often, I think this is a really important point from the very beginning, even though giftedness can seem perhaps as elitism, or in the United States, maybe as anti-intellectualism. From the very beginning, people like Marlin, who was the Commissioner of Education at the time, that wrote the Marlin Report, was very mindful of underserved populations. And we continue to be concerned about that. And our colleague from Brazil so beautifully described, it was heart-wrenching to hear that these are the very people who don't think of themselves as creative. And they can be so very creative. That is a very, very powerful but sad kind of phenomenon.
And if I could just piggyback on what Lee Johnson put in the chat about, providing as many open-ended opportunities and possibilities as we can for students. I also think it's really, really important and I will only speak to the American education system here, but to like work toward a paradigm shift in terms of, this fear of making mistakes. And I think that creativity and serendipity are, are sometimes found in the mistakes and found in those, those happy accidents, or maybe even unhappy accidents. And I think, I see so many students that just, there are of our gifted population at any rate, that are just so terrified of failure. And, if we could help them, understand that failure's cool, it's okay, and it's okay if you take a look at the process. What went wrong? How can we, and there is a great YouTube video that I use in my class, and it's, I can't think of the exact name right now, but it's basically, Super Mario and, success in life. And it's, it references students and kids and gaming, and when they're playing a game, a video game or whatnot, they can fail 1,000 times. I mean, I know with my own kids, they can be on a video game for 10 hours doing the same thing. And then in the end, they're like, yes, I finally conquered. Well, what this man did is he peeled away the elements of the video game, and you're left with really mathematical equations that these, if we could shift our perspective, or help our students shift their perspective to know that, this is what we're doing. Failure is okay, as long as you use that failure as a catalyst for future success.
Right. No, and it's an excellent principle. And I think another one we're going to come back to through the many7 hours we have ahead of us still. We have about 4 minutes. I don't know if Kent, you want to add to that as well. We're going to try to wrap up after, but do keep putting questions in the chat if there is a quick question that we might raise.
I liked very much the idea of giftedness and dealing with chance, as chance will change something and create a new opportunity. I guess it would just be good to help students that recognize opportunity quick, because there's always going to be a first adapter. And if I don't recognize the change and the opportunity and what has changed, if I'm 100th in line, I may as well not have noticed it. It's the person that gets there first, unfortunately, which is maybe a little bit, like, I think somebody used, I think, the word cunning, maybe, but that may be the skill, just that quick recognition of what is an opportunity and why is it an opportunity, as things always change.
Right. Yeah, and I think kind of staying, and this is another theme of the event, the ability to be able to welcome this kind of change and make the most of it. And this is something you've been talking about in many ways as what you're trying to cultivate in the classroom. I can see maybe a last question from Alistair very, very quickly. Is there a danger in removing gifted kids from the mainstream to develop them separately than other children? This is probably a question you've heard before. And we only have 2 minutes. So who would like to take one answer, a quick shot at it?
Okay, I guess I'll give it a shot.
Connie,
there,
you have to do it.
There's we call levels of service. So levels of service can vary anywhere from what I'll call somewhat rare to self-contained. To the other end of the spectrum might be simply served in the regular classroom. So Okay, I'm going to flip it, Alistair. I'm just going to flip it because, we can think about the danger, but what is the real danger? Is the real danger that they're going to be removed or they're not going to be with their intellectual peers. Kent and Tracy and I have had a few discussions this past week, just kind of wrapping our heads around this whole serendipity thing, So look what you guys have started. But there's another danger here, and that is not having the loneliness that these children experience or these adolescents experience if they're not with their intellectual peers. So sorry, I don't mean, I know we're short on time and I'm not doing it for that reason, but I'm doing it because I think so often we let the danger of something keep us from a need that can be very important. And the trick of it, though, Alistair, to give your question credence in a short period of time, because it's time, is to say that it's all data driven. In other words, services aren't provided just because we feel like it, or we don't feel like it. We gather data to see what their needs are, and then we plan instruction, which includes time, based on what those needs are on a multiplicity of data is the best way, IQ tests and a bunch of stuff. So Vlad, tossing the ball back to you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful quick way of ending it. But I mean, this is such a fantastic discussion that maybe we should dedicate another event to. I don't know if 24 hours, maybe 24 hours, and maybe a participative kind of format, maybe a workshop, perhaps in the future we can all think about. Thank you so much, the three of you. I'm gonna give you the round of applause that should warm your hearts and all our hearts. Thank you.